Hi, I hope you are all doing well. Today I'm going to be doing a January reading wrap up. In January I read 11 books, which is so much more than I read any month last year. And I also realized when I was tallying these up, I was like, oh my gosh, I've done such a good job reading physical books this month. Look at me, I'm sitting down on the couch, I'm holding a book with my hands, doing the thing, or doing the ebook thing, same difference. It's all the same to me. So I was like, wow, I'm doing so great with physical books. Let me see how many I read in 2021 in total. And I tallied it up and I read 7 books physically in January. Either physically or an e-reader, but reading with my eyes. In 2021, I read 7 books physically the whole year. I read 42 books, but 35 of those books were audiobooks, which is wild. I didn't realize it was quite that bad, but it does sort of check out with where my attention was and things like that. So anyways, I'm very into it. We're ramping up for a really great 2022 in reading. And I couldn't be happier. So before I get to the books, I just wanted to mention again that I am starting a little something on the side where I am sending out my monthly wrap-up in email form as an email newsletter. So it'll only hit your inbox once a month. Very chill email newsletter. I just realized in 2021 that I felt like I got behind with the wrap-ups. And because I felt like I got behind, I felt like I couldn't talk about my reading without going back and talking about all the books that I missed, and I got myself into a little bit of a pickle. So that being said, I've decided that at least for the first 6 months of 2022, I'm going to be doing an email newsletter where I just do a redux where it's 3 sentences about each of the books that I read, and that will hopefully help me keep on top of it. And if I decide not to do a wrap-up some month, it'll still be in your inbox. So I will put the link to that newsletter down below. I'm pretty excited. I sent out the first one last Friday. And yeah, so those people who are already signed up have had a bit of a spoiler for this video, but still excited to talk about the book. So let's do it. So the first book that I read in 2022 is Earthlings. This book is by Sayaka Murata, who wrote Convenience Store Woman, which is a sort of short, weird book that I really, really enjoyed a couple of years ago. I think it was a 2020 book. So I was really looking forward to getting into this one, and I picked it up over Christmas vacation. And if you think Convenience Store Woman is weird, this brings things to another level. So basically, the premise of this book is there is a young girl and her cousin who are very close friends, and they meet every summer when they visit their grandmother in the wilderness of Japan. So the young girl, Natsuki, is convinced that she has magical powers, whereas her cousin is convinced that he is from an alien race that got dropped on Earth, and they both feel like outsiders in their community, in their family, and in society at large, which is sort of bringing back a lot of the thematic things that came up in Convenience Store Woman. But this book goes so much farther than Convenience Store Woman did. I would look up the trigger warnings on this if you have some that you need to be aware of. It does get sort of almost horror adjacent, I would say. So not ruining anything, but this was a very intense book and a very, very weird way to start out the year. It's a good thing that I'm not superstitious about the first book that I read in a year, because I'd be like, what is this? Anyways, all that being said, I really don't know what to rate this book. I think it's probably a 3 or 4 star, but it's just one of those books where it's I didn't really actively enjoy it, but it did make me think a lot. I'd give it 4 stars. We're just in a good mood. We're giving out all the stars. Okay, so that's this one. Next up, I read Sex, Drugs, and Cocoa Puffs, which is an essay collection by Klosterman. Klosterman is a very prolific cultural critic. He writes for GQ and Esquire a lot. So he writes a lot about sort of like high-low cultural stuff. You know, there's that specific sort of cultural criticism where it's like, I'm going to take some sort of like low culture and go real hard on it. That's sort of his jam. And he also does a lot of sports. This collection was published in the early 2000s, I think 2003, and you can tell it has a lot of sort of the atmospheric sexism that was just rampant at that time. And it does... I was frustrated by that a lot of the time in this collection. However, he is a really good writer. He's like very entertaining and charismatic, and I liked a lot of the topics that he talked about. It's just, he does have some... I annotate my books. Hold on, let me find it a good section. I annotate my books, like I'll like put little brackets in and write in the margins and stuff like that. But with this book, I like truly was like having arguments with him in the margins, like I was writing so much because I was just like angry. I don't know how I feel about it. Literally, this section here is literally just talking about how materialistic women are and how like all women want is stuff. Like they're just super consumerist or whatever. And then literally on the next page, he starts describing how he like sleeps in a pile of dirty clothes like a bed bug. And I was just like, is this your standard? You literally sleep in a pile on the floor and women are materialistic. Like, what? Anyways, so there was a lot of eyebrow raising bits like that. I'm not sure if I would really recommend this collection. I know he just came out with a new one called The 90s. Given that's published in 2021, hopefully it's better. I'm considering reading it. I don't know. I'm very torn. This got a 2 stars. I'm pretty sure. Yes. 2 stars. Okay. The next book I read was A Molecule Away from Madness. This is a new release by Sara Peskin, and the premise is that brains can be derailed very easily by small molecules, small molecular causes. And this is like very much an emerging field, but this book's premise was basically like, okay, we're going to talk about like all of these diseases, whether it's genetic, like Huntington's and Alzheimer's, or whether it's like a disease caused by lack of a nutrient or exposure to a toxin or something like that. And we're going to go through like the case studies of these diseases, but also their molecular underpinnings. And the case studies were very well done. You can tell that she really like takes time to talk to and understand patients and got a lot of background about their life beyond just the disease that they had, which is like, you know, sort of a lot of the best case study writing sort of gets to the people as a whole, and then also how their disease affects their lives on top of them as a person, not like the disease and then the person as a sidebar, I guess. Anyway, so she was great at that stuff. The molecular explanations in this book were so bad. Like, I don't want to... I just, like, every once in a while will decide, oh, I should be, like, reviewing new books. So I did request an arc of this, and I don't want to tank her release. I think that there are a lot of really good aspects of this book, and you should consider reading it. However, if you're going into it expecting to have, like, good explanations of the molecular underpinnings of Huntington's and Alzheimer's and, like, all the other diseases that she talks about, they're not there. They're not good. And this is in part because, like, honestly, the molecular neuroscience isn't there yet. Like, we don't actually have good explanations for why things happen the way they happen. There are, like biomarkers and, like, certain ways each disease present. But a lot of the stuff that she was talking about is still sort of a mystery. But then also she didn't really explain the bits that we do know either. So I was very frustrated with the explanations here, the molecular explanations. I think that they were not good at all. And I feel bad because it is a new book, but I gave this 2 stars. I think she's going to she's going to publish more books and they're going to be great. But like, it's just, that was like a very specific part of this book that was like a central bit that did not hit the mark at all for me. So that's my opinion. Anyways, moving on. The next book I read was Ancillary Mercy by Leckie. This is the 3rd book in the Ancillary Justice trilogy, so I'm not going to talk about the plot a lot, but it did deliver. I gave it 5 stars. I really loved this series. I think there is a little bit Deus Ex Machina in the end, like things sort of clean up very nicely in a way that you don't think they're going to at the beginning of the 3rd book, but it was still very satisfying. I mean, I just loved all the characters in this trilogy by this point. I think that she totally stuck the landing. Yes. I am very pleased by this series, and I need to find a new sci-fi series I like as much. Recommendations are welcome. After that, I read Cultish by Amanda Montell. This had been recommended to me many times, mostly by Noelle. I know that Noelle this is like one of her favorites. But Cultish is basically a nonfiction book that goes over the language of cults, and she starts with like real cults like Jim Jones and things like that. But then she also reviews sort of how cultish language makes its way into our everyday life. So how cultish language can draw you into like a multi-layer marketing scheme, or how it's affects people in like the Peloton community or people who do CrossFit and stuff like that. So I definitely feel like the second half of the book, where it's talking about the cultish language of everyday life, was like the most insightful bit, but I really did enjoy this whole thing, and I have been thinking about how people use language to both manipulate in like a negative and sometimes in a positive way, which was sort of something that I wasn't expecting out of this book. So it really made me think a lot, and I very much enjoyed it, and I very much recommend it. So Cultish, 5 stars. Yes. After that, I read Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy by John Le Carre. This is like the very classic Cold War spy tale. I remember watching this movie as a kid, but I didn't remember anything about it. And I had tried reading this in audiobook before, but I hadn't been successful because it is a very slow burn story. Like, the plot moves very slowly, especially for a mystery spy thriller type of thing. I think that that's just sort of like our modern expectations for what this sort of book is paced like versus, you know, when this was published. And I think the 1970s, I think the expectation is that you had a little bit more patience with the plot. But basically, this is about George Smiley, who is a ex-intelligence officer who has been told that there is a mole in the British intelligence service. A Russian mole, because this is Cold War. Throughout the story, there's a lot of like, who can you trust, and collecting little bits of information as you go along. And there's actually a lot in this about sort of like the bureaucracy of spycraft, but then also you get little tidbits of, I don't know, the adventure stuff, people going off to Hong Kong and like pretending to be other people and stuff. I don't know. I feel like it's very well done, and the characterization is great. Like, the people are definitely people in this story, and I'm very excited to read the next one. So I gave this one 4 stars. I don't think that was a very good plot explanation, but it was how I felt about this book. So yes, I recommend. Everybody already knows this is a good book though, so cool. All right, I got hot, so I changed. And I also realized that you can see my dead plants up here. It's basil. Anyways, we're keeping on. Next up, I read The Things You Can See Only When You Slow Down by Haemin Sunim. So this is basically a very short book of Buddhist aphorisms. I listened to it in audiobook form, and it was definitely sort of just like something that I kept on coming back to, because I was like, I don't know what I want to listen to. This is the one on my phone. I'll just do it, you know, whatever. So I feel like I didn't really approach this book in the right way, but I did not get very much out of it. I mean, I feel like I couldn't tell you one, like, aphorisms, like, oh, think about this or do that. I can't think of one just like off the top of my head. I feel like that's sort of the point of this sort of book is like, oh, like you sort of internalize like one or two of them and you're like, oh, this is like a useful way to like reframe the situation or a useful thing to think when I'm getting frustrated in this way or whatever. And none of them stuck for me, but I also definitely didn't listen to it the right way. But also, what can I say? It was my experience of the book. So I gave this 2 stars. It was what it was. That's the only book this month that I really just like felt very meh about. Like even the ones that I rated low, like Mr. Chuck here, I wasn't rating it low because I didn't engage with it or like didn't feel anything about it. I rated it low because I had some problems with it. But a lot of my reading last year was just sort of like, meh. So I am very excited. I keep on coming back to it, but I am very excited about where I am right now with books. Anyways, the next book I read was How to Write an Autobiographical Novel. You've already seen this book on this channel because I started reading this last March, I think. Or maybe it was April. But I started reading this during one of my reading vlogs. I do normally go through essay collections quite slowly. This one took me a while to get through, but I really only read like the last 50 pages of this month. I super enjoyed this essay collection. Again, like a lot of essay collections, not every single one was a banger, but there was enough bangers in here that it's definitely a 5-star. Alexander Chee is much better known for his fiction. But I do sort of like reading essay collections by fiction writers because I think it's very interesting to sort of see how they think about story and characterization and how that relates to real life. And, you know, the title of this collection, How to Write an Autobiographical Novel, is very telling about Alexander Chee's philosophy. Anyways, the good news here is that Alexander Chee is a very, very good essay writer. I think, you know, you can find his essays online at a number of different outlets and also on his own blog. So, like, you don't need to buy this book if you just want to check out his writing. But I super recommend this collection. I thought it was very insightful about being a gay man, hanging out in San Francisco and being a gay rights activist in the 80s and 90s. And growing up biracial in Maine, and like a whole bunch of really, really important life experiences. I don't know. I highly recommend this one. Next up, I read Flowers Over the Inferno by Ilaria Tuti. This was a very spur of the moment read. I think I just heard some podcast where somebody was like, oh, I'm reading this great mystery novel. And I was like, okay, download the audiobook immediately. Cool. Let's go. Let's do this. And I did enjoy it. So basically, this is a mystery novel set in the Italian Alps where a man is brutally murdered. He's like laid out naked and his eyes are gouged out with like somebody's fingers. Like they did it with the fingers. Anyways, there's a lot of like gruesome thriller elements to this book also, but sort of the main plot is obviously trying to catch this killer, and it's Superintendent Teresa somebody is trying to catch this killer, but she's also an older woman and has started to have some memory problems. I think some of the best parts of this book were descriptions of her sort of experience, like having these moments of forgetfulness. Like you say moments of forgetfulness, like, oh yeah, you just forgot some stuff. But it got very into sort of like what early onset dementia might feel like. And obviously that brought up a lot of interesting tensions with the plot because it's like, can she trust herself with this case, with catching this killer, etc. So the main plot of the book, I wasn't as into, like it resolved in sort of a weird way, I thought. But I'm not going to spoil it. But it is a little odd. I feel that about a lot of mysteries, where I love a lot of the sort of like conceptual framework, a lot of the characters around the main plot, and then the main plot, I'm like, well, that was fine. That was a mystery. So overall, I gave this 3 stars. I think I would be interested in reading further because I'd be interested in sort of seeing more of, you know, first having an elderly woman. I keep on calling her elderly. I think that she's like middle-aged to late middle age, and this is like an early onset dementia type thing. But I do find sort of like that older protagonist with these sorts of issues could potentially be really interesting going forward. So I'm interested. I would read a second book. I'm not sure if I would read a third book if it's sort of the same quality. Anyways, that's sort of where I am with that. After that, I read Why Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism. Kristen Ghodsee is a professor at UPenn, and I think she's technically an ethnographer. She does a lot of work studying how women in Eastern Bloc countries were treated before and after the fall of the Soviet Union. So her point in this book is that there are actually a lot of ways that socialism was really good for women, and having financial independence and state childcare and like real maternity leave and stuff like that can improve the lives of women. I thought that all of these were great points. I think that the research is really, really interesting. None of these ideas were like fully new to me. Like they're all things that I can definitely get behind and have heard about before. The approach was new and interesting to me, like hearing about these women's experiences in particular was interesting. And Ghodsee is obviously like an expert in this field, so it was very deeply researched, which is something that I always want to see in nonfiction. I do think that she danced around the issues of the Soviet Union and the fact that not everyone was benefiting from state childcare, because some women were literally in gulags. So there is that. She sort of waves that off and is like, yes, there's already been a lot said about how bad the Soviet Union was. I'm just going to talk about some of the good stuff that was there that maybe we can learn from, which I think is valid. But I do, like, even if it's not your interest, if you're writing a book like this, you have to engage with, all women in Eastern Bloc countries, not just the ones that benefited from the system. That being said, I still really, like, she's a great writer. It was a really interesting read, so I gave it 4 stars. And then the last book that I read in January was Why Fish Don't Exist by Lulu Miller. This has been on my TBR for a very long time. This is basically sort of an interwoven memoir of Lulu and a biography of this fish taxonomist called David Starr Jordan. David Starr Jordan was a big figure where I grew up because he was also the first president of Stanford University. My middle school was named after David Starr Jordan. It is no longer named after him, so... Anyways, so I had sort of been putting off reading this book because I know a lot of people really, really loved it, and honestly, the best way to ruin a book for me is to overhype it. So knowing that this is like one of Olive's favorite books ever, I was sort of like, let me just cool my heels and make sure that I'm not going into this with too high expectations. I think my expectations were still slightly too high because I liked this book. I did not find it like really revolutionary. There is a sort of twist in this book, or like a before and after typo situation that I'm not gonna ruin here. If anybody else has read this, I have thoughts and feelings, so if you want to chat, just let me know and we'll chat, because again, I have thoughts and feelings. I think having it as a twist was very important to the experience, so I won't say anything else. All that being said, I gave this 3 stars, which for me is a like. I feel like I have to say that every once in a while. 3 stars, I liked it. 2 stars is meh. Alright, thank you so much for watching this video. Again, I'm very excited. I'm very excited about reading right now. So let me know what you read in January. Let me know what you're planning on reading in this next month. I personally am feeling in the mood for some romances. I already read Evie Dunmore romance. I feel like I only know the top line romance writers though, like the true bestsellers. So if anybody has some like one step deeper than that they want to recommend, let me know. Something I'm thinking about this month. Anyways, great, cool. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week. Bye.